Hello. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the third session of the evening, How to Interact with Institutions, Public or Private, with Malena Arcucci and Jennifer Wong from the Science Gallery in London. Thank you guys so much for joining. I'm going to run through, some of the ground rules. But first, I'll introduce myself. I'm Ayana Blair Ford. My pronouns are she, they. I have, for accessibility, I'm going to explain what I'm looking like right now. So I've got dark hair, dark brown skin. I wear dorky round glasses, cheesy smile, and dimples. And I'm the assistant director of Tour de Moon, a festival coming to you in 2022. More on that a bit later. So today we're really excited to have Malena Arcucci and Jennifer Wong leading this session on how to interact with institutions. This meeting will be recorded and uploaded to Tour de Moon and the University of the Underground YouTube. So if you don't want to be seen, please do turn your cameras off. When it is uploaded to the internet, you can of course share it with anybody in your network. So today we're going to hear from each of our speakers for about 20 minutes each. Then we have time for a 10-minute talk and then maybe a 10-minute breakout session if that talk doesn't go on. And the last thing before we kick off, I just wanted to quickly show you. Oh, hello. Hello. Okay. The last thing I quickly wanted to show you is our open calls for Tour de Moon. So Tour de Moon is an interactive, immersive festival happening in 2022 next year for live events and immersive experiences. So if I show you this, again, I know some of you in the last session, so you've already seen this, but to show you again, we have lots of different events and grants and things available for you to get involved with and be paid for. So, for example, create an immersive film, you get up to £25,000 to do that. To make a short film, around £3,000 to make that. I've spoken about a lot of these already. So what about this one, Moon Bar? If you're based in Newcastle, Leicester or Southampton, we have the opportunity for you to give talks and about £150 to give a talk about something that you're interested in. But today, what we are here for is to talk about how we interact with institutions. So if you have a big idea, if you want to storm your local council, if you want to get something into parliament or anything like that, I'm sure that Malena and Jennifer will have ideas on how you can begin some of those conversations. So a bit of a quick introduction to both of you. So Jen runs the exhibition and event program at the Science Gallery. She has a background in exhibition development and experience production, a degree in natural sciences, and an MPhil in history and philosophy of sciences. She's also the co-founder of Guerrilla Science Ltd and has previously worked for the Dana Center, Wellcome Collection, Science Museum, and Natural History Museums. Jen, did you want to introduce yourself and maybe say what you look like?
Yes. So, hi, I'm Jen. I have black hair. It's tied up in a bun, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm wearing a grey jumper, and I'm in a studio today.
Awesome, great. And then our other speaker that we have today is Malena Arcucci, born and raised in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Malena is a performance maker currently based in London. She uses devised and visible theatre techniques in combination with her background and interest in costume making and sculpture to explore new forms of storytelling. Malena, did you want to quickly introduce yourself and say what you look like?
Yeah, hello everyone. I am Malena. My pronouns are she, her. I have fair skin, white curly hair, freckles, and I'm wearing a blue top.
Awesome. Great. So I think that between you guys, you've decided that Jen's going to start it off for us. So without further ado, Jen, it's over to you.
Great. I'm going to try and share my screen. One sec. Is that going to work? I think you need to make me an admin, Ayana.
Sorry, say that again? Can you not share?
I can't share.
Darn. Okay, give me 1 second. Maybe try now?
Doesn't seem to be working. That's okay. What I might do is ditch the slides.
It's maybe because she didn't set it up on her. So.
Okay. Yeah, possibly. It's enabled on our side. So if you don't mind, you can dive in and talk.
Okay. So I was just going to share a little bit more about my background and then kind of dive into how I'm thinking about institutions at the moment, share some of the institutions I've worked with previously, and then kind of try and think about institutions as resource providers to really like set the scene. Ooh, something's
yay, I think it worked.
Okay.
Amazing.
Thank you so much.
That's me actually. So Jen, if you want to tell me next slide.
Okay, cool. So if you, thank you so much, Malena. If you go back to me pushing the brain in a wheelbarrow, that would be great. I just wanted to share this photo of me. This is me at Green Man Festival, which is in Wales, in the UK. It's a music festival that has a really great lineup, and also a walled garden called Einstein's Garden, where Guerrilla Science took a program a really long time ago. But the reason why I wanted to share this image is because sometimes interacting with institutions feels quite difficult, and it was hard for me pushing this wheelbarrow filled with a giant brain through a sea of mud, which is what you can see here. But there are ways, tips and tricks to kind of make it feel a bit more glidey and a bit easier, because what the brain represents here is like your precious ideas and project that you want to see take off, and sometimes it feels like you're wading through treacle in partnership with institutions, but it doesn't have to be like that. So Malena, if you go to the next slide. So when I was thinking about institutions, I was like, okay, so there's lots of different ways to think about what an institution is. It is everything from like customs and traditions in society, kind of like looking at structures of society. But if you are kind of going off my experience, my background is very much in museums and galleries. I've spent literally years in quite large and bureaucratic organizations. Think about national museums like the Science Museum and Natural History Museum. And at the moment, I'm at Science Gallery London, which is part of King's College London, which is a big university. So I was thinking about things that these organizations have in common, and really they are there for the public good. I think if you looked at their kind of vision and mission statements, you would find something that is about education or making the nation's heritage more accessible, stuff like that. So Malena, if you go to the next slide. Thanks. This is just a kind of snapshot of some of the institutions I've worked with to give you an idea of what I'm thinking about when I'm talking about institutions. So you see some foundations like the Wellcome Trust. So they're essentially independent grant-giving bodies. They run different types of schemes that you can access as a creative to try and get projects off the ground. And there's also the Science and Technologies Facilities Council. So because my background is in science, I have worked with a number of researchers to apply for grants successfully to do public engagement with science in places like music festivals or other places that aren't expected for science. And you'll see here on the slide, there's quite a few cultural organisations. So everything from the Museum of London, National Portrait Gallery, Barbican, Wellcome Collection. These are all dedicated public-facing institutions who want public audiences and are always trying to tell stories in a new way. So I think there's a really great opportunity there for creatives like yourselves to kind of utilize what's within these institutions to tell the stories that you want to tell, using everything from their collections, their spaces, and their histories, to really bring different audiences in. I think all of these institutions are really keen, especially now, to think about how to continue contributing to a cultural landscape post-COVID, etc. So if we go on to the next slide. Thanks. So I think this kind of list really is what I'm gonna kind of go through to just structure, to like, I guess, set the scene. So, you know, as a creative, I think all of these institutions would offer commissioning opportunities to do new projects, new work. It might be an artwork, it might be a project involving a particular type of audience group. Within these institutions as well, like even though they seem quite like ivory towers from the outside, actually, if you get beyond that kind of seemingly impermeable membrane, there's actually a lot within the institutions in the form of the people that work there, the expertise that they hold, the assets that they look after. So for example, the Natural History Museum has like huge collections, both on site at the museum and off site in various storage facilities. These collections are owned by the nation, and the museum is preserving those collections for the nation. And so if you're a storyteller, if you're a creative who wants to get behind the scenes and kind of do a research project on stuff within the collections, then you should be able to do that if you find the right people to talk to. Obviously, like museums and galleries are public spaces, and these public spaces can be occupied and used in you know, whatever way. Like, you don't actually have to ask permission. And then finally, I wanted to kind of chat about youth programs. So obviously, the Tour de Moon Open Call is kind of looking at inviting 18 to 25-year-olds to pitch ideas. And actually, if you're a young creative in the UK or elsewhere, there actually are quite a few skills and development opportunities that institutions can provide, to provide you with a new platform, to help you develop new skills, to get, I guess, involved in the public programs within these institutions, and yeah, create new work. So if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to show you a quick image of the kind of last exhibition that Science Gallery did before we shut because of COVID. This was a show about genders, called Shaping and Breaking the Binary. And on the right, you can see a kind of live research process. So it was live action role play that was being used as a research tool. So there were games designers and visual artists collaborating with professors of law who specialized in kind of the structures within society that shape how gender is manifested on lots of levels. And then if we go to the next slide as well. And this is another example of a work within the genders exhibition. So this is a work called We Are Here Because of Those Who Are Not, which is by an artist called Danielle Brathwaite-Shirley, who I think is on the list, if she hasn't already spoken already.
Yeah, she had them on earlier.
Amazing, perfect.
So, yeah.
Perfect. So this artwork is kind of like being inside a video game that documents the Black trans experience. And what Danielle did was work with a variety of different young people to inform the characters that you meet in this experience. And Science Gallery commissioned Danielle to make this new work, which is going to go to Science Gallery in Melbourne in 2023. So in terms of commissioning and funding opportunities, institutions can really and want to, like, from Science Gallery's point of view, like, nurture the next generation of young creatives to get their work out there, and can help both in the commissioning of new work, but also the further journey onwards from whatever exhibition it starts off with into other parts of the world via the Science Gallery network in this particular instance. If we go to the next slide. Okay, this is like my favorite exhibit ever. It's a giant squid. It's called Arcucci, and it lives in the Natural History Museum in the tank room. So the tank room is basically a room of very large wet specimens. So wet specimens are specimens that are stored in alcohol. These specimens are too big to fit into other spaces within the museum. So they're in the basement, partly because it's totally dead. Don't worry. It's kind of that chat point from Gwendoline. It was asking whether it's dead, and yes, most of the collection in the Natural History Museum is dead. But yeah, it's I think Damien Hirst actually had to design the tank to fit this giant squid in, and actually the museum wants audiences to engage with the content and the collections within the tank room. And so you can sign up to go on spirit tours of the collection to get that behind the scenes aspect to the museum, which I think is definitely underutilized, but there are ways in. And I just included that image because I wanted to remind you and everyone that the collections are there to be used. And so even though within a museum kind of gallery space, there's a limit about how many specimens can be on display, etc. They do exist and they are behind the scenes, but you just need to find the right ways in to access them. So if you go to the next slide. So I just wanted to go on to thinking about institutions as public spaces. So Science Gallery London is basically at the bottom of the Shard in London Bridge. On the map, I just kind of located it within space, so you can kind of think about these buildings in the context of the landscape that they are part of. And actually, nearby there's Borough Market, there's London Bridge Station, there's a hospital, there's Tower Bridge and London Bridge, and all of those kind of geographically, it's in a really interesting space, and it is a public institution. And if you think about the flow of people that go through these spaces in London Bridge every day, it's like massive. And so institutions that are public facing really want that traffic, and they want new ways of inviting audiences into the space. If we go to the next slide, this is the main entrance of Science Gallery. So on the ground floor, again, like, there's a big window to try and invite people into the space so they can see what's going on inside. Often institutions don't have the luxury of like putting a massive window in to kind of obviously be permeable, but the aspiration to invite people in is always there. And then if you go to the next slide. So at Science Gallery on the other side of the building, there's a public courtyard. So this is London's last unreconstructed Georgian courtyard. It's, as you can see, well, in the background, you can see the Shard. It's like literally by London Bridge Station. And it's a brilliant space that we are hoping to use for the public programme, especially in the summer when we're living in pandemic times and outside events are much easier to orchestrate in terms of capacity and COVID safety. So we're using this at the moment. There's a huge vaccination hub in the courtyard, giving people their booster shots mainly. But when that comes down, we will be using that to, again, like invite people to participate in the program. There will be performances, there will be commissioned sculptures, a whole variety of things happening there. And then if you go to the next slide. I just put this slide in here because this is Luke Jerram's Museum of the Moon at Leicester Cathedral. So it's kind of thinking about, again, like seemingly closed institutions like cathedrals, like the church, being opened up through like creative activity happening within the space. So here it's an exhibition of Luke's Moon, and I think it pulled in huge numbers of people into a space which they might not have normally gone into if they're, you know, not particularly religious, for example. And I think, yeah, I think that's a really great outcome for lots of different stakeholders within that particular project. So if we just progress to the next slide.
Just so you know, Jen, we only have like a few more minutes, and then we
That's
have
cool.
to jump over to Malé, but
yeah, great. No worries.
This is awesome.
So this, I just wanted to like flag that many institutions and galleries in particular and museums do have specific programs for young people to get involved in the program. So here at Science Gallery, we have run 2 kind of cohorts of young leaders who get involved in all aspects of the program, from kind of thinking up ideas in the first place to doing consultation work to actively working with artists and researchers to deliver, say, for example, like a weekender event within the program, or things that you actually see on the gallery. So if you go, Malé, to the slide number 15.
Things are different.
Yeah, so these are just some examples of what the young leaders got up to. So they did a kind of protest scene workshop. They programmed panel discussions, debates. They did loads of creative workshops. They did some consultation with other members of the community in preparation for an exhibition. And I think through that, they developed skills that they didn't necessarily think they were going to get. But from that, they can then use those skills in whatever their future pathways might be. So I'm just going to finish on slide 17, which is a couple of slides. Yeah, so practical tips. I think these are some things we can chat more about in the Q&A if you like. But if you're thinking about institutions as partners for your creative practice, then you really need to do your research, look at their vision and mission, look at like how your project and practice aligns with that. I think finding the right people to talk to is really key. I call these gatekeepers because they can point you in the right direction, put you in touch with the people that you actually need to speak to progress your idea. And yeah, articulate how your practice and your particular project that you want to do with them serves that mission. I think just don't be afraid to ask. Just ask for an opportunity to pitch your idea. And when you get that opportunity, you need to be really clear about what you want out of the relationship and what support you need from them. Get agreements in writing. And then in terms, if you go to the next slide, sorry, Malé. Mindset's really important. So institutions are large often, not always, but when they are large, and national museums are like a case in point, or universities, they are bureaucratic, they are slow, they are conservative. So to get through that, and it will pay off if you get to the end of a project successfully, you need to be patient, you need to stay open and positive, and you need to be open enough to collaborate with people who are, you know, juggling a lot of different competing priorities. And this last thing about staying focused on what you want to achieve and your end goal is really important, because that will help you get there. That's it from me.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's great. And I think honestly, those last two slides particularly, like, super, super helpful in kind of like giving practical tips and advice. Getting your agreements in writing, really great point that I think probably needs a bit of stressing. Really, really great point. So I guess it's time to move over to Malena and whatever she wants to tell us about this idea of speaking to institutions and getting through to them. So over to you, Malena. You're muted.
Can you see a full screen, or can you see my notes as well?
We can't see your notes.
Okay, cool.
So you're good.
So a full screen with me touching like with an Elizabethan ruffle neck.
Yes.
Is that right? Amazing.
Yep.
Cool. So I think it's great that Jen and I got paired up together, because I'm on the other side. I'm probably the person who spams Jen asking her to feature me in exhibitions. I am a theater maker, a designer, and a producer. I'm from Argentina originally, but I'm based in London. Most of the time I spend as a costume and set designer in different productions of West End and Fringe theater productions, like this one at the Blue Elephant Theater, or this one at the Gate Theater. But I'm also co-artistic director of Marina Malena Theater Company. Oh, my internet is not, yeah, there you go. Marina Malena Theater Company, which I founded with Mariana Aristizabal in 2016. And the idea behind kind of like starting this company together was creating spaces to tell our own stories as Latin American female theater creators, but also an opportunity to explore non-hierarchical theater making techniques in the context of UK stage, which, if you don't know, is, yeah, it's insane. It's kind of like very structured, very hierarchical. So we were trying to find like how we could incorporate some of more Latin American theater making techniques like creación colectiva and teatro oprimido into our practice. And I'm also a documentary film producer, which is why I'm in Buenos Aires at the moment. So anyways, this is all to say that I have kind of like very different relationships to institutions. Sometimes I am, as I said before, the person who's kind of like asking for help and support. Sometimes I'm sharing work and doing work collaboratively, and sometimes I am part of the institutions who's providing opportunities for others. And I have done a lot of work with governmental institutions during my time at the University of the Underground between 2017 and 2019. So I'm going to try to tidy things up and to share a little bit with examples my experience. And then I'm going to try and kind of like give you some tips the same way Jen did, and we can probably or hopefully take it like on a case-to-case basis to see whether or not I have some advice as well. So anyways, I've divided kind of like my experience dealing with institutions into 3 groups. The first one is kind of like a very transactional relationship. It's basically an institution has something to offer, and you as an artist needs it. It can be money, it can be space, it can be time, it can be support, it can be contacts. These kinds of relationships tend to be kind of like a little bit, or at least in my experience, a little bit stiffer. But at the same time, the terms and conditions of the collaborations are very, very clear. So grants, space hires, open calls, exhibitions are good examples of this. There's a fixed term and a fixed amount of money that you will get in exchange for your work. At the same time, that relationship goes on the other way. So the institutions are looking for something specific that you as an artist can provide, be it like your work and your ideas. And unfortunately, sometimes it also has to do with kind of like race and gender and kind of like their objectives and kind of like general objectives. But I'll go into detail in a second. The second kind of collaboration is great. It's like a very genuine collaboration, and I love when that happens, but it's rare to find. It is when two agents, like an institution and an artist, come together with their own personal agenda, but with a kind of like desire to create something in common, and usually kind of like the result of that collaboration is unique, like as a standalone piece. And finally, the infiltration, which you might hear a lot about at the University of the Underground. If you are students of the University of the Underground, it is a relationship in which or by which you kind of like infiltrate or get inside an institution in order to provide or present a completely different point of view. It can be confrontational, but it's also it's disruptive, and not, I don't mean that in the kind of like the wrong way. I'll show you some examples. It's not disruptive in kind of like destructive, but rather kind of like presenting or radically changing the way in which somebody thinks. So I'll start with the first, kind of like a transactional relationship, and we've all mentioned the kind of like Tour the Moon, but it's a very good example. So I'm constantly, my life as an artist is whatever happens in between funding applications. So say I would like to apply for to write a short play as part of To the Moon. They're looking, or it says on the open call that they're looking for emerging and seasoned writers to write short scripts. That is something that is like very well within my skill sets and that of my company. And I have the time to write the application. So my advice is like, the open calls hold very, very little information about what the institution is actually looking for. They tend to be quite vague and non-descriptive. So what I tend to do in order to approach kind of like this kind of, to get to know the institution a little bit better, To the Moon does a very good job at giving you the information because they have a mission page, but it's not the case always. But usually all institutions have a sort of annual or kind of like general objectives. And it's understanding or starting to kind of like follow those breadcrumbs that will give you more hints as to what it is that they're truly looking for. In this case, for example, if I again go back into my practice as an example, I am not a nightlife artist necessarily, but I did grow up in a culture shaped and transformed by experiences of colonization like Argentina. So my work usually deals with themes of immigration and displacements, and is often multilingual. So if their mission is to decolonize, there's something about my work that might be of interest for To the Moon or this institution in particular. And I might be able to kind of like incorporate that into my application and the way in which I present my work or highlight those aspects of my work in order to kind of like call their attention. It's kind of like rare, in my opinion. And the other, before I say anything else, another place where you can find like information as to how to approach an institution is by understanding what kind of artists they support or they have supported in the past. So just going through their about past exhibitions, kind of like also reaching out and talking to artists who have participated and have been like supported by them. I think there's something, I think most institutions kind of like their job is long-term, so they will kind of like continue to try relationship with certain artists in order to kind of like deepen those relationships, which means that if your work is down the same lines, you might be in luck. In general, I think when institutions say that they're looking, or in my experience, they're looking for artists at any stage of their career, or who talk about kind of like whatever they want in whatever discipline they want. That tends not to be true, but they might not disclose it straight away. And I think it's up to us to kind of like do the kind of like spy and research job of understanding what their priorities are at any given time. But this is when I think this is kind of like just a very simple example of when the kind of like that transaction is quite clear and out in the open. So somebody in this particular case has money and time, and that's what you need in order to share your work, and they in turn want your work or your script. But sometimes it's a lot more complicated. So this is me at the Geospatial Research Institute in Helsinki. So in 2017, I started researching conspiracy theories and likening them to mythological and religious narratives, in that they kind of like have the ability to reveal collective fears and understandings of the world. So I started, I kind of like did research on conspiracy theory communities, but also started kind of like creating links to the scientific institutions that might be able to corroborate or debunk these theories. Turned out to be like the wrong way to go, but it doesn't matter. That was like very early in the research. Anyways, I was particularly interested in the theory that Finland does not exist or is not a real country. So I decided that I wanted to go to the Geospatial Research Institute in Helsinki to measure Finland and find kind of like empirical evidence that it exists. I managed to get there, and I'm going to tell you a bit more detail later with my advice. But basically, I kind of like, first of all, I found the emails. I think it's important to know that all governmental and academic institutions tend to have open and disclosed emails for their employees. So it's quite easy if you look hard enough, or if you find at least one email, to kind of like start contacting people. And basically what I did is started sending emails without saying that I was researching conspiracy theories, but rather saying that I was like deeply interested in a new website where they were compiling and digitalizing maps for the whole of Finland, that I was a design student, and that was kind of like really interesting to me, which is not really a lie. I was a design student, and that was interesting, but it's not necessarily why I was going to be there. But I was wary of telling them that I was researching conspiracy theories. And after like a lot of back and forth, and a lot of emails, I managed to spend a week with them, kind of like doing LiDAR and radar research there. But while I was in Helsinki, I had not been able to get in touch with Nokia. Nokia is like much more secretive. So I really wanted to go. So I found that there was an award ceremony for students. So I signed up as a press person to go and cover that award ceremony. And once I was there, I was able to go walk through the headquarters in Helsinki and kind of like take a look at a place where I had not had access before. This is like, I'm just trying to exemplify kind of like different ways in which I have reached out directly or indirectly to certain institutions. And finally, kind of like actually talking to the conspiracy theories, which was done in a completely different way, because in this particular case, I didn't actually, I had nothing to offer to them other than truths they were not willing to listen to. But I kind of like, I started hanging out on the Reddit groups and chatting to them, and kind of like emulating and copying the language in order to gain their trust and kind of like establish conversations. Turned out that it made no sense to tell them that they were wrong. So I kind of like eventually stopped. I'm gonna go. Another example of kind of like more unconventional relationships I've established with institutions is with the International Criminal Court in The Hague. That was in 2018. We wanted to do a mini opera regarding like collective traumas in institutions. And we wanted to talk about how the International Criminal Court is historically lacks the support and recognitions from key countries in the world, which means that it has no jurisdiction in Russia, in the US, and in other countries that are, have a lot of weight politically worldwide. So we started sending emails. I was working on this project with Joseph Please, and we started sending emails, and it was impossible to reach them the kind of like traditional way we found. What we did was get in touch with previous members of the International Criminal Court to kind of like get a bit of context and understand how it works, what the working dynamics are, but also how this kind of like situation is impacting the institution. And then with that information, we were able to kind of like reach out again in a much more informed way. Eventually, I ended up managing to talk to them and getting interviews by signing up to their guided tours of the building in The Hague. And once I was in there, I approached the communications officer, who happened to be Venezuelan, so he was quite happy to be spoken to in Spanish, and kind of like charm my way into getting an interview. But I'll go into more detail. And then finally, I think these are kind of like collaborations, and I, as an artist, I'm a lot more shy than other people, and I'm a lot more careful and wary. I'm always kind of like scared. It might be a gender thing, like scared of annoying and upsetting people. But some of my classmates have done like really interesting stuff. This is Joseph Please, Jack Wackern, and John Jack Brickles. They did a project called Salesforce is Not a Band, where they reappropriated the logos for Salesforce, which is a company that sells cloud space, a very big company based in London. They appropriated the logos, and they created a punk rock band called Salesforce, using all of their imagery, and writing songs about kind of like capitalism. They were contacted indirectly. I mean, they could not reach that institution, and they just stole all of their logos, and later on they were contacted by the lawyers asking them to desist of using any more of their things. And finally, not my classmates, of course, but there's this artist who I love and who I always think about whenever I am in despair. Her name is Mirle. So in the 70s, she created this piece, which is called Maintenance Art, in which she went to different museums in Chicago and other cities in the US and just started cleaning the floors for hours and hours as a durational performance. I think this reminded me again about what Jen was saying about reappropriating public spaces, which is not at all what she was saying. But then at the same time, there is something about like spaces that can be used by all, and whatever we choose to do in those kind of like really carries meaning. In this particular case, I think she was talking about role of women within the arts, and also role of artists within artistic institutions. But there's infinite ways of using public space and kind of like making a statement once you've reached the point in which you're not going to be able to kind of like go the traditional way, if that makes sense. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to switch to the other. Can you still see this Word document?
Yep, we can see it.
Amazing. So I guess my advice is to kind of like be super structured when reaching out for institutions or people who might be able to help you in your work. Firstly, is like, who do you want to contact? I think the first instinct is to kind of like go really high up, you know, the CEO, Elon Musk, or whoever, and say like, okay, go big or go home. But I think sometimes it's much more rich to talk about other people working within those places. So communication officers and PR departments are great to understand how an institution or a place wants to be perceived, which is a lot of times as artists what we are interested in. As I said, with the ICC guided tours, it was really interesting to see what they had to say on those tours. Somebody in the periphery, a way to understand institutional dynamics. So it could be kind of like former members or former employees, or people who truly understand because they have worked there for a really long time, but they don't necessarily hold kind of like really high ranking positions. Customers and users, or people who experience these institutions, people who visit them. That's not necessarily apply for artistic ones, but for example, two of my classmates became Deliveroo drivers to kind of like understand how Deliveroo works, and then did a project about that. Then how to find them, I touched upon some of these things. but contact details are usually listed on their website, particularly if they're governmental or kind of like academic institutions. You just need to kind of like dig a little bit. They're not going to be the first thing that appears, but they are there. And then once you understand what the system to create emails is, so for example, if an institution has, it's always the first letter of the name and the last name at something, then you can pretty much guess the email from anybody who's working there. Nepotism and proximity, unfortunately, but also very luckily, like you, a lot of you are already part of the University of the Underground, and it has a huge advisory board. They know a lot of people. They're kind of like, they do truly know a lot of people, and they are sort of available if you take the time to reach out. Family members and friends, and my next advice is talk about your projects, not only because it allows you to start articulating them much more clearly, but also because you never know who knows somebody of interest and who might be able to help you kind of like reach the people you want to reach. Social media platforms are really useful. People will answer on LinkedIn, even though it feels weird, but they do. And you can always, my advice is for Facebook and stuff, just send them a quick message and say, can you give me your email? I want to share a project with you. And they will usually do it. And then in person, attend conferences, go to guided tours, kind of like go to the institutions you want to be a part of. It's really embarrassing, and I've done it before, when you go to, for example, a conversation with theater and you have seen 0 plays that they have presented. It's kind of like get to know, do the research, get to know the institutions you're going to be asking things of. Choosing a medium. I'm running out of time. I'm sorry. I can cut here and then send these documents, but kind of like be strategic about the way in which you present yourself. I sometimes choose to present myself as a researcher, sometimes as a, well, not anymore, but I used to as a student, sometimes as a producer, sometimes as a theater maker. And I think it's okay to kind of like put on different hats for different people. And also don't be too formal when it's not okay. If I talk to anyone in Argentina, for example, I need to be like really, really informal. Nobody will take me seriously if I pretend to be, I don't know, fancy. And then also beware of the information that you provide. Like people don't usually want to you to expose them if they've given you contacts, etc. Okay, I think I'm gonna cut it there and we can leave the rest for the questions. Is that okay, Ayana?
Yeah, of course. That was great though. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And yeah, it would be great if you could send that document at the end as well, and maybe we can send it around to everybody here. So now is a great time to open it out to questions from the floor. So if anybody has any questions for either Jen or Malena, it'd be great to hear from you about now. But a question I've kind of been asking everybody at the end of sessions is, you know, if somebody's starting something from scratch, if it's their first time kind of, you know, applying for something or speaking to a certain set of institutions, if there was one golden rule or one thing you had to tell them, what would it be? And I know you both kind of touched on it with your list at the end, but if you had to pick one like really important thing to remember, what would that be?
I guess I would say have confidence in yourself and your idea, and don't be afraid to just like put it out there.
Yeah, very similar in my case. I think it took me a really long time to realize that I had just as much to offer as those institutions, and that they needed me as much as I needed them. So I think there's something about understanding what it is that you have to give and kind of like trusting that and going for that.
Amazing. Right, we do have a question. Is it Isha? Yeah, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I have a question. What sort of support should you be asking for from institutions? Should you be asking more like for money and commission and collabs, or like in-kind support, or just like marketing and portfolio building? Like what, as a like someone who's just starting out, what's the best thing to be asking institutions for?
I think it really depends on your project. So for example, like thinking about Science Gallery London, I get a lot of requests from artists or researchers who are like, please can I have space to show some work? And I'm like, generally in those circumstances, like, no, because they haven't addressed like what the gallery is trying to do, which is ignite creativity where art and science collide. And, you know, our focus is really our target audience of 18 to 25-year-olds. So I suppose, yeah, it really depends on what your end goal is for your project. If it's new creative work, then you can ask for like a meeting and a conversation. I think conversations are always really the way forward, so that you can kind of get to know each other and what your strengths are and what each party has to offer. And I think those kind of slightly more transactional relationships are best explored in person if you can, like a face-to-face conversation.
That's a really great answer. Male, did you have anything to add to that, or any other thoughts on that?
No, I was going to say the same thing. And also, but the only thing is maybe that I'm never doing really with one institution at a time, but rather it's kind of like more like a network, right? So there's certain institutions that, like the Arts Council, well, they give money. So usually what you're gonna ask them is money, and then all of your meetings are going to be directed at understanding how to get that money. But then at the same time, you might be talking to others to get like seeding funding or space or mentorship, or as Jen was saying, just kind of like advice and conversations. And I think all of those together kind of like make your project happen rather than trying to get one institution to do it all for you. That is rare.
Right. That's really, really great advice, really good thought. Did anybody else have any questions or any thoughts they wanted to give? No? Okay, well, considering we are quite close to the wire with time, I think we're going to wrap it up there. But thank you both so much for joining and so much for giving such great insight and such great answers to these questions. Actually, I think really, really helpful and a really good basis for people to start having these conversations and start, you know, getting in touch with these institutions. So thank you very much. Anybody else who's still around, stay tuned for the next session, which will be how to make a meme, hosted by digital creative company Flying Object. We're going to wrap it up there, but thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for speaking, guys, and see you soon.